So it was June of 2022, and I was already home on disability leave, short term, because my feet started developing, I would say, mildly severe neuropathy. And that was as a side effect of another medication I was taking, nothing to do with what was to come. So I was home anyways. I was struggling. My mom had already flown in from out of state to help me because I was at a point where my feet were pretty much rendered virtually useless because they were very much so in pain, and I couldn't really get out of bed. I could barely move myself around my place, so it was difficult. But one day in particular, I was just sitting in my chair as regular, got up to go to the bathroom, came back, and one of the things we have noticed in all of my years of my own medical complications is that one thing typically tends to affect another in some way, shape, or form. So in this case, my feet were under a lot of distress. My lungs started to get more distressed. At least this is how the theory goes. So I came back just from the bathroom, and all of a sudden I was having trouble breathing, just huffing and puffing here or there, nothing major, no pain. But I did notice that my blood oxygen saturation levels were decreasing into the 80s, which is not good, but I was tolerant of it because I've dealt with tougher circumstances before, let's say that. And so I didn't think much of it, but sats still going down. Something's wrong, right? So I had a couple of cans of Boost oxygen with me, and so I started to take those, try to get my oxygen levels up, and they did momentarily, but it was not a long-term solution. As soon as I stopped, these cans are maybe 12-ounce cans that'll last a couple of minutes. So a couple of minutes here or there, great, but as soon as I stopped, my sats would just go back down. So we decided ultimately to bite the bullet and say, all right, we're not in a distress, no, we're not in a real emergency, life-threatening necessarily, but we still need to address what the problem is. So we decided to go to the emergency room at the local hospital. And so I was hesitant to go in first, of course, because I dealt with some of the circumstances, but it was the next best thing that we could have done. So we went to the ER, and they got us in pretty much immediately as soon as we arrived. And what is the ER trying to do? The ER is trying to assess what's the problem, first of all, how to stop it, and what's the underlying issue, what's the cause, what's the effect, how do we treat it, and ultimately, what's the cause. So they're looking for a problem. They got me on some oxygen, and my sets went up just fine. As expected, I was stable. They took all the blood tests and x-rays and CAT scans and CT scans, whole 9 yards, MRI, etc. 50 some nurses and doctors all around me within minutes. And it is very difficult for even experienced radiologists to get a good read on my lungs and the state of them, because my lungs are so restrictive anyways from prior surgeries and scoliosis, etc. So it's very difficult to tell when there's actually a problem needing to be addressed. And so they took one look at my scans and said, well, we're trying to find a problem. The scans don't look great, but compared to the other scans, they look fairly similar, but not necessarily the exact same. So what's the next best move? they diagnosed me with some chronic bronchiectasis, which is essentially a bunch of gunk can get clogged up very easily in my upper lungs, and that's shown on my scans, etc. In hindsight, that was probably there all along, but nobody was in the right headspace to determine what was there before, what is new, what the real problem is. So there's a lot of big questions, right? So again, what's the next best thing to do? Start treating a problem, even if it's not the correct problem necessarily. Start treating a problem so that you can get out of there as soon as possible. At least that's the idea, right? Anyway, so they decided to take me into the ICU, started treating me as if I had a lung infection, essentially, to clear up my lungs, because that's probably what's causing the oxygen stats lowering. At least this is the theory. So they get me in there, they put me on antibiotics, heavy antibiotics for about 2 weeks, and I am arguably worse than when I came in. These meds are inducing nausea and headaches. I can barely do much of anything because I'm just so sick from all these meds. So the doctors come in after 2 weeks and they starting to say, all right, it's been 2 weeks, we've tried to treat this lung infection and nothing seems to be getting any better. So what's the next best thing that we can do? Well, we can get you in for a bronchoscopy. So what is that? That's basically where they put you under anesthesia and they go into your lungs, scope it out, clear out any gunk that isn't supposed to be there, and come back up, extubate you within a couple hours or so, or a day, and you should be good to go. So they got me in for a bronchoscopy, and I just remember having some horrible nightmares during this time. They had me on morphine, a couple of other drugs, and I remember waking up 5 days later, still intubated, and my mom was even questioning whether or not it was really me who was regaining consciousness, because apparently for those 5 days I was just a completely different person altogether. But I was able to convince her that it was me and all was well, got back to a normal headspace anyways. But I was still intubated, so that wasn't necessarily predictable. We knew that it was a risk, especially putting someone with chronic lung issues and other medical conditions under general anesthesia. But as I wrote on a whiteboard frequently during this visit, it is what it is. So what's the next thing we gotta do? Get me extubated. So it took another couple of days, tried to determine when is the best time to take me off the ventilation system, because that's basically what the intubation extubation process is. They put a chest tube into your throat so that now you're breathing fully on ventilation support. So they had to take me off of that. So when they did finally decide to extubate me, they took out the chest tube and there was no breath. As in, I couldn't breathe, there was no gasping for air, there's just nothing, just an open mouth. It's like my lungs forgot how to breathe. And so as they had me on a BiPAP ventilator before, they quickly switched me over to this BiPAP, just a mask over my face like a CPAP. And the BiPAP allowed me to keep breathing on that support system. So clearly my lungs were not quite prepared to breathe on their own without ventilation support. And at the point now in this part of the story where the doctors and nurses were not sure what to do, of course, right? But they knew that I couldn't stay on ventilation forever. And so they started talking about, well, if he's going to stay on not life support, but ventilation support for however long, probably looking at months rather than years left to live. Because my lungs are not supposed to be on a machine for the entirety of their lives. They're just not designed that way. So eventually the thought is my lungs are gonna give out from the ventilation support system. And so with all of this in mind, my dependence on the machine, all the emotions and thoughts going around between myself and my family and the doctors, my first thought, of course, my first thought was, how can I live the best life that I can for the rest of my days? And they were talking about hospice care for a while, and I knew in the back of my mind that what the heck is going on? All of this from oxygen saturations dropping when I first went in to now we're talking about hospice care. Something isn't quite right here. But nevertheless, this was the reality that we were dealing with. So I go to bed one night and I can't fall asleep. The lights are off in the hospital room and everyone's asleep except for a couple of nurses or staff, and I can't fall asleep. I'm looking at the side of the railway. I'm trying to fight the machine. This machine is breathing for me at this point. So I'm trying to fight it because I want my lungs to get better, right? Because I want to change my reality. And so I'm fighting this machine, and I'm really struggling with it. And as my eyes are closed, I start to get this feeling like I'm descending, as in maybe I'm on my way out. So as I'm getting this feeling, I go into this vision, is the best that I can describe it. Again, my eyes are closed, trying to fight the machine, trying to fight to stay alive, and I'm descending, and I'm feeling like if this is it, then so be it. I've lived quite the life. I'm so grateful for the life that I have lived up to this point, and I'm only 23 years old at this point. And so I started thinking about my loved ones. I started thinking about all of my family and friends and everybody that I've loved and supported and gotten the chance to meet and to be with on this earth. I'm thinking about memories over my lifetime of really good times, highlights of my life. I'm thinking everything through, and I'm using that love, that pure willpower to stay alive, to fight to stay alive. I'm trying to fight this machine. I'm in the hospital bed, and I'm fighting to breathe. I'm fighting to stay alive, and I'm holding on to this love, to this hope, to this willpower to keep breathing, to keep being around for as long as I possibly can, while at the end of the day accepting if I were to be on my way out the door. So as strong as my will was, and the love that I had for everybody was, at the end of it, I was just exhausted. I was exhausted from having to fight. And so there was a moment when I stopped trying to fight it. I let go. I allowed my body to do what it was going to do. But as soon as I let go, all of a sudden in this vision that I was experiencing, I saw bright white light. And out of this bright light was a hand, what I can only describe as a white hand, like a Mickey Mouse hand. As silly as it may sound, it was this hand and it was reaching out for me to grab onto. So I reached up and I grabbed onto this hand, and the hand started pulling me up. And I felt like I was accelerating upwards, like I was being saved, like I was no longer descending, I was no longer dying. There was hope. I was going to breathe again on my own. I was going to live again. As I'm being pulled up, as I'm accelerating up to whatever destination we're going to, me and this hand, all I could feel was this peace and unconditional love and joy and all that is good in the universe. It was just this unbelievable feeling, and there are tears streaming down my face, and we get to the top of wherever we're going, and I open my eyes, and I'm still back in the hospital room. Lights are still off, everyone's still asleep. I'm still looking at the side railing, thinking, what the heck was that? What did I just experience? And so, with all these thoughts in my head, I'm still struggling to fall asleep, but after a while I was able to. So the next morning, I wake up and tell this story to my mom. She's impressed, obviously as impressed as I am, with all the questions and interpretations, but she had said at one point that at some point during that night, she looked over and saw that my BiPAP mask was off my face, meaning I was breathing regular air with my own lungs without support for however long it was, which shouldn't be possible at this point, according to doctors. But are the two events correlated? I don't know. I can't prove you otherwise, is all I can say. From that day forward, I knew instinctively that I could get myself out of the situation that I was in, that I was gonna breathe again on my own. I was going to eat again, because at this point I had a feeding tube in. I was going to gain the weight back that I lost, and more. I was gonna get my life back again. I was gonna talk again. I was gonna sing again, even if it's in the shower. So I worked every single day to get even a little bit better, whether it was to move some more muscles or to get out of bed, to walk around. At one point, I was walking around the hospital with a cane and looking at outside, going, I'm gonna get there one day. I'm gonna get myself out of this situation, and it will be glorious when I do. Eventually, I was able to convince the doctors to let me eat solid foods again, because I was able to wean myself off of ventilation support over time. And eventually, over the next month or so, I was able to leave the hospital with little to no ventilation supports. I decided to keep the feeding tube in to help me gain even more weight. But other than that, I had most of my physical functioning life back. And after about 6 months of at-home recovery, I returned to work. So what was that? What was that hand? What does it mean? Was it the hand of God? Was it something else? The only logical... No. So what was that hand? What does it mean? Why? What does it all represent? What's the story here? What the heck happened? I was not as religious then, and I could only logically conclude that this must have been God. It had to be. However you think about it, however you think about God, whatever your relationship with religion is, this was something that I couldn't have imagined even if I wanted to. It was external intervention. It was, why would I think about a Mickey Mouse hand lifting me up from decelerating into a hole or something? I don't know. I couldn't have made this up. And it felt way too personal for it to have been some kind of psychological brain compensating for trauma response. The way that I choose to think about it was that was a trial in a way. It was as if God was asking, if you endure the suffering I give to you, will you choose to give your life up for me? Will you choose to let go of this life in the pursuit of love and all that is good in the world? And I think it's because in my last moments I was thinking nonstop about love and clinging to love, my family and friends and relationships, and holding on to that as my driving force to keep living. I think that's a big part of why God might have saved me in that moment, because he would have seen me in my pain, seen me in my suffering, and said, you are a good soul. You are a good person. You love unconditionally. You give back to those who have helped you along the way. I need you to stay alive because you have a much greater mission on this earth if you choose to accept it. And second of all, it gave me the hope, the motivation to keep going and to get myself out of the situation that I was in, to strive for a better tomorrow, to always strive for a better tomorrow, to always keep pushing myself, to always keep fighting, and to never give up in the face of adversity, and to always hold on to love, because that is our only why. That is our only true why. So why do I share this? I don't share this to try to convince you that it was God, but to convince you to convert to religion. I say this as simply a testimonial of my experience. You can believe what you choose to believe, and I will do the same. And in the end, the truth will win, no matter what that is.